My name is Hollis Vance. I'm 36 years old, and for 11 years my family told everyone I was between things. Not unemployed, not struggling, between things. It was kinder than the truth they believed, and crueler than the truth they didn't. Every Christmas, my mother mailed 93 cards. Each one had a family photo on the front and a handwritten note on the back, customized for the person opening it. My older sister Tabitha was always thriving. My younger brother Reed was always brilliant. And me, I was always the same 3 words, written in my mother's looping, beautiful cursive. Hollis is searching. Last December, on the Saturday before Christmas, my mother stood at the head of her dining table in front of 14 relatives and handed me that year's card. She smiled when she did it. She said, "I thought you should read it aloud this year, dear, so you can hear how it sounds." She believed she was about to watch me humiliate myself in front of the whole family. What she didn't know is that I'd been waiting 11 years for her to put that card in my hand, because what I read aloud to that table was not what she wrote. And what I slid across the table 40 seconds later is the thing my sister Tabitha still cannot talk about. To this day, she changes the subject. She gets up and refills a glass that doesn't need refilling. To understand why a single sheet of paper could do that to a family, to understand what was in that leather portfolio I'd set on the floor by my chair, you have to go back. Back to the summer my mother decided who I was going to be. And back to the night I started keeping receipts. Stay with me. Because this story doesn't end where you think it does, and the part that mattered most didn't happen at that dinner table at all. I grew up in Wexford, Pennsylvania, a suburb north of Pittsburgh with cul-de-sacs named after English counties and a country club everyone belonged to and nobody admitted they couldn't quite afford. My father, Garrett Vance, was a tax attorney, the kind of man who said maybe 4 sentences at dinner and meant all of them. My mother, Coraline, ran the house, ran the garden society, and ran her 3 children like a portfolio she was hoping to take public. Tabitha was the oldest, for years ahead of me. The trophy. Penn, then Wharton, then a marketing job at Pearson Pharmaceutical, climbing every year. My mother kept a binder of Tabitha's press mentions on the coffee table, angled toward the door so guests would see it on their way in. Reed was the youngest, 6 years behind me. The prodigy. Skipped a grade, won a National Science Award at 14, off to Brown. My mother had a framed photo of him shaking hands with a senator on the mantel. And then there was me, the middle. In our house, being the middle child didn't mean being overlooked. It meant being unfiled dash. Tabitha was the success. Reed was the genius. There was no slot left, so my mother made one. She called it searching dash, and she put me in it, and she kept me there. Here's the part she got wrong. I wasn't searching. I knew exactly what I loved by the time I was 7 years old. And the woman who showed me was sitting right there at every family dinner, being ignored almost as thoroughly as I was. My grandmother, Imogen, was my father's mother. She taught art at a girls' school for 41 years before she retired to a stone cottage in Sewickley, 20 minutes from my parent house. She was the one who put the first art book in my hands, a thin paperback on the Painter Mary cassette, when I was 7. She'd written a tag inside the cover. For the I in the family. I still have it. Imogen and my mother had what you might politely call a complicated relationship. Coraline found Imogen difficult. Imogen found Coraline exhausting. They were unfailingly courteous to each other, which is the most hostile thing 2 women can be. When I was a child, Imogen would take me through the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh, room by room, and teach me to look. Not to glance, to look dash. She taught me that a painting has a back as well as a front, and that the back often tells the truer story. The stretcher marks. The old labels. The dealer's stamp half scraped away. She used to say the same thing every time, like a prayer. Hollis. Quiet things accrue. I didn't know what it meant for years. I just knew it was important because she only said it when we were alone. Hold on to that phrase. It's going to come back. Everything in this story comes back. I went to a small liberal arts college in Ohio that nobody in my family had heard of. I studied art history because I loved it and because for once nobody told me what to do. I graduated with honors. Nobody framed the diploma. It went in a drawer in the guest room, and as far as I know, it's still there. After college, I moved to Philadelphia and took a job as an assistant at a gallery in Old City. $42,000 a year. I shared a row house with 3 roommates and a radiator that screamed at 6 a.m. The first time I told my mother what I did, she was quiet for a second and then she said, "Oh, that's nice for now."
For now.
2 words. A whole verdict in 2 words. I was 23, and I'd just been put on probation for a sentence I hadn't been allowed to finish. But the gallery was where I actually became someone. I learned to read a canvas from the back. I learned how to tell a collector something they didn't want to hear and keep them as a client. I learned to write a condition report that would survive a lawsuit. For years in, at 28, I left and started my own practice: authentication, provenance research, private collections. 3 clients the first year, 11 by the third. I never told my parents the practice existed. That wasn't a plan. It grew the way ivy grows, quietly in a direction nobody was looking. By the time it was real, telling my mother felt like handing a loaded gun to someone who had already shot me with the unloaded one. So I didn't. The only person who knew was Imogen. And it would be 2 more years before I learned that there was a second person who knew something, knew at least that a Hollis Vance was doing serious work in the art world, and chose to bury it. When I found out who that was and what she said, it changed everything I was going to do at that dinner table. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you to the night the label was born. The Christmas I was 25 was the first year of the long card. Before that, my mother had sent a normal photo card. But that year, Tabitha got promoted to senior associate, and a normal card was no longer enough to hold the news. So my mother designed a trifold. Photo on the front, printed greeting in the middle, and on the back, a handwritten update, personalized for each of the 93 people on her list. She showed me the first batch on Christmas Eve. She'd made coffee. She wanted me to admire her handwriting before she admired it herself. I read Tabitha's entry. Tabitha continues to excel at Pearson, where she was recently promoted. We could not be more proud. I read Reed's. Reed is thriving at Brown, where his professors call him one of the most gifted students they've encountered. Then I read mine. Hollis is searching for her path. We know she will find her way. I set the card down on the table. My mother was watching me over the rim of her coffee mug, and I want you to understand, she was enjoying this. Not cruelly. She didn't think of herself as cruel. She thought of herself as honest. What does this mean? I asked her. It means what it says, dear. I have a job. I work at a gallery. I didn't think the gallery thing was something we wanted to feature. She said it the way you'd say, the stain on the carpet dash, or the crack in the ceiling dash. A thing best not pointed at. Then she folded the card, slid it into an envelope addressed to her college roommate in Connecticut, and sealed it. 93 people. One of them about to read in beautiful cursive that I was lost. That night I lay in the guest room and traced the crack in the ceiling I'd been tracing since I was 18. And then I got up and I went downstairs. The finished cards were stacked on the dining room sideboard, addressed, stamped, ready for the post office. I lifted the top one, the one going to my mother's roommate, slid the card out and read the entry about me one more time. The capital H on my name had a little flourish, the same flourish she used when she signed legal documents for my father. Like she was signing a deed. I put it back. I went into my father's office, opened the bottom drawer where he kept his legal pads, and I copied the entry, word for word, onto the top sheet. Hollis is searching for her path. I dated it. December 24th. I folded it and put it in my purse. I didn't know why I was keeping it. I only knew I'm a person who keeps receipts. And this was a receipt. What I didn't know yet was how many more I'd collect. Or that I'd build a binder. Or that the binder would eventually sit in a leather portfolio on the floor of that same dining room, 11 years later, loaded and waiting. The next morning I drove back to Philadelphia. And the next December the cards said the same thing. It never stopped. That's the part people don't believe when I tell them. They think a thing like that softens over time. It didn't. It escalated dash. The year I was 25, Hollis is searching for her path. 27. Hollis is still finding her footing. 29. Hollis continues to explore her options. 32. We remain hopeful that Hollis will discover her direction soon. I bought a portfolio binder, the same kind I used for client provenance files, and I started a tab. I labeled it Cards Dash. By the time I was 30, that tab had 5 entries. By 33, 8. By last December, 11. I didn't keep them out of bitterness. I want you to hear that because it matters. I kept them the way I keep everything in my work. Dated, labeled, filed. In my line of work, the smallest piece of paper can change what a thing is worth. I'd authenticated million-dollar paintings on the strength of a faded label glued to a stretcher in 1890. I didn't know yet what my papers would be worth. I was just doing what I always do. I was waiting for the appraisal. Now. I told you the label didn't stay on the page. Let me show you the first time it walked out of the card and into a room full of people. The year I turned 35, Tabitha made vice president of marketing at Pearson. And my mother did not send a card about that. A card was no longer enough. She threw a dinner at the country club. 40 guests, printed menus, the whole production. My father stood up halfway through and raised his glass and called Tabitha the kind of daughter every parent prays for. I was sitting 11 feet away. I clapped. I ate the salmon. And then, near the end of the night, one of my mother's Garden Society friends, a woman named Bev, leaned across the table toward me and asked, kindly, "And what about you, Hollis? What are you up to these days?" It was the first time in 3 hours anyone had spoken to me directly. And before I could open my mouth, my mother answered for me. "Oh, Hollis is still finding her way," she said, with a little laugh, patting Bev's hand. "She's got an eye for art, that one. We're hopeful, out loud, to a table, about a 35-year-old woman who, at that exact moment, held a contract with an international auction house and owned a row house in Rittenhouse Square that her mother didn't know existed. Bev smiled at me sympathetically, the way you smile at someone recovering from surgery. Tabitha, 2 seats down, in the glow of her own toast, didn't say a word, didn't deflect it, didn't redirect. She let it sit there, because a sister who was still finding her way made her own shine just a little brighter. I said nothing. I went home. And that night, I added the dinner to the binder, and I wrote a sentence under it that I want you to remember because it's the moment this whole thing turned. The card isn't a description. It's a casting decision. And I've been cast. That was when I understood. I wasn't a disappointment my mother was waiting to be proud of. I was a role she needed someone to play. The family needed a searching one. The way a story needs a setback, so the winds land harder. Tabitha was the triumph. Reed was the genius. And someone had to be the one we're all hopeful about. The question that kept me up that night wasn't, why does she do this? It was, how do I get out of a role the whole audience has agreed to believe? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was about to learn just how far my mother would go to keep me in it. It got worse that spring, and it got more deliberate. In May, my mother called me. I was in the back office at the auction house in New York, reviewing a condition report on a portrait by Franz Hals, a painting worth more than my parents' house. The call went to voicemail. "Hollis, it's your mother. I was talking to Maddox Brennan at the club. Their daughter Ainsley is single, just moved back from Charlotte, getting out of a difficult marriage. I told Maddox you'd call her. I gave Ainsley your number. Please call her by Friday. And Hollis. Maddox sees us at the club every week. I can't have her thinking my daughter is the kind of person who isn't making progress." There it was again. Making progress. I was a project she was managing toward completion in front of an audience of women at a club. I called Ainsley. She was perfectly nice. She had exactly zero interest in being set up by her mother's friend, which was fine, because nobody had asked either of us. My mother had simply decided that 2 unmarried women in their 30s must be incomplete in a way that could be solved by introducing them to each other, like matching 2 halves of a torn ticket. But here's the thing that happened the thing I wouldn't learn about for 2 more years, and the thing that changed who I aimed at when the moment finally came. That same spring, Tabitha was at a work event in Philadelphia. A collector there, a man on one of the boards I now consult for, though I didn't know him yet, made small talk with her. He'd recently heard a specialist's name come up, a sharp young authenticator doing provenance work on Northern European paintings. Hollis Vance. He asked Tabitha, idly the way you do. Vance, any relation? You wouldn't happen to know her? And my sister who had grown up 4 doors down from me, who shared my last name, who knew exactly who Hollis Vance was, looked at this man and said,
No.
no one I'd vouch for. She knew. She had the truth in her hands at a cocktail party, and she set it down because a sister, who was somebody, made Tabitha less of the only somebody. She protected her pedestal at my expense, and she did it with a smile, and then she drove home to her 4-bedroom colonial and never mentioned it to anyone. I'll come back to that sentence. No one I'd vouch for. When I finally learned it had been said, when I learned who said it, I stopped planning a confrontation with my mother. I started planning something bigger. Because the rot wasn't just at the top of the family. It went sideways too. Let me tell you what I'd actually been building while my mother told 93 people I was lost. The practice grew the way trust grows in the art world, slowly, by referral. A collector in Bryn Mawr sent me to a collector in Greenwich. Greenwich sent me to a foundation in New York. I authenticated a painting attributed to Vermeer that turned out to be a workshop copy. Bad news. Delivered to a man who'd paid a fortune for it. He took it with grace, paid my fee in full, and told every collector he knew that I was the one person who'd tell them the truth even when it cost me. That's the best advertising there is. By 32, I had 2 museum boards for private foundations and a family in Saudi Arabia who collected Dutch portraits. At 34, a major international auction house gave me a contract appointment for Northern European paintings and flew me to London twice a year, where I sat in a little office on Bond Street and looked at paintings older than my country. At 35, I bought the row house in Rittenhouse Square. 3 stories, original moldings, a small garden behind a wrought iron gate. I paid cash. The closing took 12 minutes. I told no one in my family. They thought I still lived in the shared house in West Philly. They thought I still worked at the gallery in Old City, which had, in fact, closed 4 years earlier. Imogen was the only one who knew. I'd told her on her porch the week I closed, and she'd set down her teacup very slowly and said, Hollis, I always knew you understood that quiet things accrue. Then she'd looked out at her garden for a long moment and added, your mother has spent her whole life accruing loud things. You'll find they don't compound the same way. She was my one true witness. And she was about to become something more, because Imogen was the only person in the family with the standing to walk me into that dinner and make sure I didn't lose my nerve. But before any of that, the secret almost died. 2 years before the dinner, my mother held the truth in her own hands at a garden party, and what she did with it is the reason I stopped feeling guilty about any of what came after. It was a Saturday in June. A garden society event at a house in Sewickley, the kind of afternoon with little sandwiches and a string quartet nobody listened to. One of the women there, Marjorie Pell, a collector's widow with more money than the rest of them combined, had apparently read a trade publication. A real one, the kind my world reads. And in it was a short piece mentioning a catalog essay I'd written for a major attribution. My name, Hollis Vance. Marjorie found my mother by the lemonade and said, Coraline, isn't your middle girl in the art world? I could have sworn I saw a Hollis Vance in Apollo magazine, writing about Dutch paintings. Very impressive. I know exactly what was said because Marjorie told me herself, 18 months later, at a conference in New York where we both happened to be speaking. She remembered it vividly. She remembered it because of what my mother did next. My mother laughed. A light, dismissive, isn't it funny laugh. And she said, oh, that's just Hollis. She dabbles. We're hopeful she'll find something that sticks. She dabbles. Marjorie, who had spent her life around real specialists and knew the difference, was so startled she didn't push it. She just filed it away the way I file things away and brought it back out a year and a half later when she put 2 and 2 together on a conference stage and realized the dabbler and the specialist were the same woman. But here's what undoes me. Even now, my mother had the truth handed to her, on a silver tray, by a wealthy woman she desperately wanted to impress. All she had to do was get curious. Call me. Ask me one question. Hollis, Marjorie Pell says she saw your name in a magazine. What is that about?
She didn't ask.
She didn't call. She set the truth down like a dish she hadn't ordered, and she went back to the version of me that was easier to carry. That was the moment, more than the cards, more than anything, that I stopped feeling guilty about what I was going to do. Because I finally understood the cards weren't ignorance. My mother wasn't writing searching because she didn't know better. She was writing it because the truth was inconvenient to the story she liked telling. She chose the lie. Every December, 93 times she chose it. And a person who chooses the lie has no standing to complain when someone hands them the truth in front of an audience. Then in August, the thing happened that turned all of this from a wound into a plan. I was at a preview at the auction house, walking a client past a small panel attributed to a follower of Memling, when a man approached me. Maybe 60. Gratuit notier. The kind of money so old it had stopped announcing itself. You're Hollis Vance, he said. You wrote the catalog essay on the bout's attribution at the Frick. I did.
I'm Cyrus Linwood.
I run the Linwood Foundation. I knew the name. Everyone in my world knows the name. The Linwood Foundation funds conservation at the great museums. Its endowment is north of $600 million. Its board is famously closed. We have an opening on our acquisitions committee, Cyrus said. I'd like to talk to you about it. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. He called the following week with an offer. A 3-year appointment, an honorarium of $140,000 a year, travel, and a seat at the table where decisions get made about which paintings the foundation acquires and places on loan to American museums. I accepted. And then Cyrus said the sentence that made everything else possible. We'll announce it at the gala in January. The press release is being drafted now. It'll go out nationally, and I should mention, since I'm a Pittsburgh man, the Post-Gazette always picks up anything with my name on it. Do you want to review the draft before it goes? I said yes. I read it in October. It described me as one of the most respected independent specialists in Northern European painting working in America today. It listed my clients. It mentioned the auction house contract. It mentioned the row house. It said I'd lectured at Yale, Williams, and NYU. And it would be picked up by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, the newspaper my mother reads every single morning over coffee. In January. But the Christmas card, the card that for 11 years had told 93 people I was lost, went out in December. I sat in my office and did the arithmetic. 11 years. 93 recipients. Somewhere north of 1,000 individual instances of my mother writing, in her own hand, that I had not found my way. And in January, those same people would open a newspaper and learn the truth from a stranger. I had a choice. I could let the newspaper do it. Sit back, stay clean, let Cyrus Linwood's press release detonate while I was 400 miles away, and let my mother field the phone calls. That's what Tabitha would do. Stay clean. Let other people deliver the news. But I'm not Tabitha. I'm the middle child. I keep receipts. And I wanted to hand my mother the bill myself. I called Imogen. I told her about Linwood. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, Hollis, what are you going to do? I'm going to read the Christmas card aloud at her dinner this year. She never lets you read it. She will this year. She's wanted to embarrass me with that card for 11 years. She just needs the right moment. I'm going to give it to her. Imogen laughed, a small, dry, delighted laugh I'd been hearing my whole life. You're going to give her the audience. I'm going to give her the audience and the pen. There was a pause on the line. Then, Hollis. Yes. She may never recover from this. You understand that. Your mother has built her entire self out of the story she tells the club. If you take that story apart in front of 14 people, she may not be able to put herself back together. Are you ready for that to be true? I'd thought about it. I'd thought about almost nothing else. I'm not doing it to break her, Grandma. I'm doing it to stop being the thing she breaks every December. Imogen was quiet again, and then she said the thing that told me she was all the way in. Will you take me with you? Grandma, I was going to ask. The dinner had been an institution for 20 years. The Saturday before Christmas, 16 to 20 relatives, a catered meal, and a reading of the Christmas card by my mother, standing at the head of the table, as a kind of grace before the food. She'd started the reading the year of the long card. The year I was 25. For 11 years, I'd sat through it. Tabitha's update grew. Reed's update grew. Mine stayed 3 words. In November, I called my mother and told her I wanted to take a more active role in the family this year. That I wanted to read the card aloud myself. She was suspicious for about 4 seconds. I could hear it in the silence. And then I heard her decide it was an opportunity dash. Because if Hollis read the card, Hollis would have to stand in front of 14 relatives and read aloud, in her own voice, that she was still searching for her path. My mother had been waiting 11 years for me to volunteer for my own humiliation. "That's a lovely idea, dear," she said, and I could hear her smiling. "I'll have it ready for you. I'd love to see the final version a few days early, so I can practice." Of course. She emailed me the draft on December 14th. My entry read, "Hollis continues to explore her interests in the art world. We remain hopeful she'll find her direction." I wrote back, "Looks perfect, Mom. See you on the 21st." Then I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote what I would actually read. I worked on it for 3 nights. I wasn't writing a speech. I was writing a paragraph that would sound, to anyone who'd heard my mother read that card for 11 years, exactly like something she would write. Same cadence, same restrained, performed pride, same family voice. The only difference was that mine would be true. And I packed 3 things into a leather portfolio I'd bought for exactly this purpose. The 11 cards. The Linwood Press release on foundation letterhead, signed by Cyrus. And 1 folded sheet of paper, the paragraph my mother would believe she had written herself, right up until the moment it wasn't. 3 objects. By the end of the night, every one of them would be on the table, and one of them would make my sister stop speaking. I drove to Wexford on the morning of the 21st with Imogen in the passenger seat. She was 88. She'd insisted on dressing for it, a navy wool suit she'd owned since 1987, and her own grandmother's pearls. She looked like a woman going to deliver a verdict, which, in a way, she was. We talked about everything except where we were going. She told me about a former student who'd become a curator in Cleveland. I told her about a small crannock I'd authenticated in October. About an hour outside Wexford, she went quiet, and then she said, without looking at me, "Whatever happens in there, Hollis, you were always the one who could see." The rest of them looked at paintings and saw decoration. You looked and saw the truth underneath. That was never going to be a small life. They just couldn't read the back of the canvas. I didn't trust my voice to answer. I just reached over and squeezed her hand, and she squeezed back, and her grip was not the grip of an old woman. We pulled into the driveway at 4. The house was lit up, wreaths on every window, garland on the porch rail, the 2 electric candles my mother had put out every Christmas since 1989. My mother opened the door. She hugged Imogen briefly. Then she hugged me and held me out at arm's length and looked me up and down. "You look thin, Hollis." "I look the same as last year, Mom."
Well, come in.
"Everyone's already here." I carried the portfolio inside and set it on the floor by my chair, tucked under the edge of the tablecloth, where no one could see it. "And I want you to keep your eye on that bag for the next 20 minutes. Because everyone in that room was about to find out what was in it, in the worst possible order from their point of view, and the best possible order from mine." The dining room was set for 16. Tabitha and her husband Sutton, a humorless man who sold reinsurance and looked like he was always doing math. Sutton's parents. My Aunt Junie and her husband Doug. A couple of cousins. 2 of my mother's garden society friends and their husbands. My father's older brother, Whit, who'd sat on a hospital board and actually knew what a foundation was. Reed in from Providence. My father, Garrett, at the head of the table, who lifted his glass an inch in my direction in a gesture that could have meant anything. And the empty seat at the foot of the table.
Meaning.
The middle child seat, as far from the head as you could sit and still be at the table. Imogen took her place on my mother's left. Tabitha was on my mother's right, wearing a green silk blouse I happened to know cost $900 because I'd seen the same blouse on a client in October. Tabitha half rose for a half hug.
Hollis.
You came. I always come.
Right.
Of course you do. She sat back down, already turning towards Sutton. And I looked at my sister. The trophy, 39 years old, vice president, 4-bedroom colonial, tired around the eyes in a way the green silk couldn't hide. And I thought about a cocktail party in Philadelphia and 4 words. No one I'd vouch for. She didn't know I knew. She had no idea that the woman she'd erased at that party was sitting at the foot of the table with a leather portfolio at her feet. My mother stood. She tapped her water glass with a fork, and the room quieted, and she held up the card, the same trifold she'd been sending for 11 years. As you all know, she said, every year I read our Christmas card aloud before dinner. It's become our little tradition. She paused, and I watched her set the hook she thought was hers. But this year, Hollis has asked to read it instead. A small ripple went around the table. Aunt Junie's eyebrows went up. Tabitha glanced at Sutton. Reed looked up from his phone for the first time. My mother extended the card across the table to me,
Slowly.
performing graciousness for the room while delivering, underneath it, a small and carefully calibrated cruelty. Hollis wants to read aloud the document that says Hollis is searching. By all means, let Hollis read it. I stood up. I took the card from her hand. Thank you, Mom. And then I did the thing she didn't expect. I didn't open it. I set it down on the table unopened, next to my place setting. I reached down to the portfolio on the floor, lifted out the single folded sheet of paper, and unfolded it. I held it the way she'd held the card, 2 hands chest-height formal. My mother sat down, satisfied. She thought I was about to read what she wrote. I began. The Vance family wishes you a joyful holiday season. This year has been one of growth and milestones for all of our children. The room settled. The cadence was right. The phrasing was right. It sounded exactly like the card. Tabitha continues to thrive at Pearson Pharmaceutical, where she was recently named Vice President of Marketing. She and Sutton celebrated their 7th anniversary in June. Tabitha gave the small acknowledgement smile she gave when good news about her was being read aloud. Reed completed his doctorate at Brown in April and has accepted a postdoctoral position in cognitive neuroscience. We could not be more proud of his achievements. Reed waved at the table. My mother was beaming now, watching the room receive her good news in my voice. We were almost at the part she was waiting for. The part where Hollis reads, in front of everyone, that Hollis is still hopeful, still exploring, still, that word, searching. And our daughter, Hollis. I let the pause sit, exactly as long as I'd practiced. Has been appointed to the Acquisitions Committee of the Linwood Foundation, where she will serve a 3-year term beginning in January. The room didn't react. The name, Linwood Foundation, meant nothing to most of them. But it meant something to my father, whose head came up. And it meant something to Whit, who knew what a closed foundation board was worth. I kept reading, and I didn't speed up, and I didn't look up. This appointment recognizes Hollis's work over the past 8 years as an independent specialist in Northern European painting. She founded her consulting practice in 2017 and now advises private collectors, 2 major foundations, and 2 museum boards. She holds a contract appointment with a major international auction house, where she has cataloged works for sales totaling over $240 million. My mother's face had stopped moving. Her hand had found her water glass and rested there, not lifting it, just holding on. Hollis was the lead author of the catalog essay on the Frick-Spouts attribution. She has lectured at Yale, Williams, and NYU. In 2022, she purchased a row house in Rittenhouse Square, which serves as both her residence and the offices of her practice. Across the table, Aunt Junie's husband Doug, a man I hadn't heard speak in 6 years, said, quietly to no one, Jesus. I finished it the way my mother always finished. The family wishes Hollis every continued success in the year ahead. I refolded the paper. I set it down on top of the unread Christmas card. And then I sat down into the most complete silence I have ever heard in that house.
16 people.
The kind of silence that has actual weight to it. Somewhere in the kitchen, the dishwasher hummed through its cycle, and it was the loudest thing in a room.
Don't go anywhere.
Because my mother was about to do the one thing I'd planned for and dreaded. She was about to fight back. And what came out of her mouth told me everything about why 11 years had happened the way they did. My mother recovered first.
She always did.
Her voice came back bright, the particular brightness she used when something had gone wrong and needed to be smoothed over in public.
Well,
Hollis, dear. Of course. We've always known you'd land on your feet. I didn't answer. I picked up my water glass. I drank. Tabitha set down her fork.
I'm sorry.
The Linwood Foundation. Yes. The Linwood Foundation. Yes. That's, Hollis, that's a serious appointment. Sutton, that's. She stopped herself, because explaining to the table how serious it was would mean admitting she hadn't known, and Tabitha never admitted she hadn't known something. Reed, 29 and earnest and oblivious, said, Hollis, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell us? He asked it with no edge at all. Just a younger brother's question. And I looked at him, and I gave him the first honest answer of the night. I told Grandma. Reed turned to Imogen. Imogen, perfectly calm on my mother's left, lifted her water glass an inch in acknowledgement. You told Grandma, my mother repeated. And the brightness was gone now. You told your grandmother about a position with the Linwood Foundation, and you didn't tell your father and me. That's right. Hollis. She set her napkin on the table, a small, controlled gesture, the gesture of a woman gathering herself for a counterattack. Why on earth would you keep something like this from your own family? Do you have any idea how this looks? You let me read that card for years dash, you let me think, and now you stand up at my dinner table, in front of our guests, and you. There it was. I'd wondered which way she'd go, whether she'd break, or whether she'd fight. And she fought. She reached, on instinct, for the version where I was the cruel one. Where the crime wasn't 11 years of searching, the crime was embarrassing her at dinner. You did this on purpose, she said, and her voice was climbing. You planned this. To humiliate me in front of. Yes, I said. That stopped her. Yes, Mom. I planned it. For about 2 months. You planned yours for 11 years. So, let's not pretend the planning is the problem. And that's when I reached down and I lifted the portfolio onto my lap and I took out the cards. I set the stack on the table in front of me. 11 of them, in their original envelopes. I fanned them so the dates showed. 2014 at the bottom, 2024 at the top, a little timeline of myself in my mother's beautiful hand. These are the cards you've sent for the past 11 years, I said. I kept every one. I have a binder in my office in Philadelphia. The binder is labeled Cards Dash. Hollis. Tabitha started. I'm not finished. I picked up the 2014 card and opened it. I read it aloud, in a flat, even voice. Hollis is searching for her path. We know she will find her way. Dash. I set it down. Picked up 2017. Hollis is still finding her footing. Dash. 2019. Hollis continues to explore her options. Dash. 2022. We remain hopeful that Hollis will discover her direction soon. Dash. I laid them out in a row, facing my mother, so she could see her own handwriting marching across the tablecloth. 11 years, Mom. 93 people a year. That's over 1,000 times you wrote, in your own hand, that I hadn't figured out my life. My mother's hand was still on her water glass. The glass had not moved 1 inch since I'd read the press paragraph. I never said you were lost, she said. Very quietly. I picked the cards up again one at a time. Searching, dash. Finding her footing, dash. Exploring her options, dash. Discover her direction, dash. I set them down.
Mom.
Those are all words for lost, dash. The silence came back, heavier now, and I watched my mother do the thing I'd known she would do, because I'd watched her do it my whole life. I watched her look for the version of this where it wasn't her fault. And she found it. And she said it. Well, Hollis, I can only write what I know. You never told me any of this. You let me believe. How was I supposed to write about a row house I'd never heard of? You can't blame me for not knowing things you deliberately hid. It was a good move. It was almost a fair one. And it would have worked on me 2 years ago. But I knew something now that I hadn't known 2 years ago. I knew about a garden party in June, and I knew about a cocktail party in Philadelphia. I knew the truth had been offered to this family twice, by two different people, and turned away both times. So, I didn't argue with my mother about what she did or didn't know. I turned to my sister. Tabitha, I said. She looked up, and something in my voice made her go still. 2 years ago, you were at an event in Philadelphia. A man came up to you, a collector. He'd heard a name, an authenticator doing provenance work, very sharp, making a reputation. Hollis Vance. And he asked you. He said, Vance, any relation? Do you know her? The color went out of Tabitha's face the way water goes out of a sink. All at once, from the bottom. You knew exactly who he was talking about, I said. Your own sister. Same last name. Same city. And, do you remember what you told him? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I watched her remember it. You told him, I said, no. No one I'd vouch for, . The room turned. 16 faces, swinging slowly from me to Tabitha, like a field of flowers following the sun. So when Mom says nobody told her, I said, that's almost true. Nobody told her, but somebody could have. You had it, Tabitha. You had the truth in your hand at a party. A man handed it to you and asked you to confirm it. And you looked at him, and you erased me. Because a sister, who was somebody, made you a little less of the only somebody. So you made me no one. Hollis. Her voice cracked on the first syllable. That's not. It wasn't like. Tabby. It was Reed. Quiet, stunned, 29 years old, and watching his family rearrange itself in real time. You knew. You knew Hollis was, and you said no one you'd vouch for? About Hollis, . And there it was. The thing 11 years of cards had never managed to do. The thing my mother's whole performance was built to prevent. The pedestal cracked. Not my mother's. Tabitha's.
The trophy.
The one who'd never had to defend a single thing in her life because the family had decided long ago that she was beyond defending. For the first time, the room was looking at her, the way they'd spent 25 years looking at me, like they were revising her. Like they were reading the back of the canvas and finding a different signature than the one on the front. Tabitha opened her mouth and nothing came out. Sutton, beside her, leaned away an inch, the way you lean away from someone who's just been revealed to be a different person than you married. Her own husband. She put her napkin to her mouth. She got up. She said, "Excuse me," in a voice I'd never heard her use, and she walked out toward the kitchen, and that, right there, was the last full sentence my sister would say for the rest of the night. She still can't talk about it. I told you that at the beginning. Now you know why. But I wasn't finished. There was one object left in the bag. My mother was staring at the empty doorway Tabitha had walked through, and I think for the first time in the entire evening, she wasn't performing for the room. She was just a woman watching her two daughters tear open something that had been sealed for a very long time and not knowing how to stop it, because she was the one who'd sealed it. "Hollis," she said. "Please. That's enough. We have guests." "One more thing," I said. "And then I'm done. I promise." I reached into the portfolio and took out the press release. The real one. On Linwood Foundation letterhead, signed by Cyrus Linwood as chair. I'd brought it for exactly this moment. I slid it across the table. Not to my mother. To my father. My father, Garrett, who had not said a single word the entire evening, picked it up. He put on the reading glasses he kept in his breast pocket. And he read it. All of it. Every line. His lawyer's eyes moving down the page the way they'd moved down 10,000 contracts. And when he got to the end, to the part where Cyrus Linwood was quoted directly, he read it aloud in his low, even voice, because I think he couldn't help it. Hollis Vance is one of the most discerning eyes of her generation. We're fortunate to have her. My father set the page down. He took off his glasses. He looked at me, and for the first time in 30 years, I watched my father's face actually change, the way weather changes across a field you're watching from a window. Something moved across it that I had never once seen aimed at me. "I did legal work for the Linwood family," he said slowly. "Years ago. Cyrus's father. These people don't. This isn't a board you apply to, Hollis. This is a board that finds you. I know, Dad. Cyrus Linwood went looking, and he found my daughter. He said it almost to himself. And then, quietly, and I found out at a dinner table, from a press release, the same day as the Garden Society women. You found out before them, I said. By 3 weeks. That's the one thing I gave you that I didn't give anyone else, Dad. 3 weeks head start. I came here so you'd hear it from me, in this room, before you read it in your own newspaper. My father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the truest thing anyone said all night. You shouldn't have had to give us a head start. We should have already known. Your mother and I should have known. He looked at my mother when he said it, and my mother looked at the table. She stood up. I think we should serve dinner, she said. It was the only sentence she had left. The administrative reflex of a woman who, when the floor opens under her, reaches for a serving spoon. She went into the kitchen, where Tabitha was, where the two of them stood among the casserole dishes not speaking, I imagine, in the loudest silence that kitchen had ever held. The dining room sat with the 11 cards laid out, the press release in front of my father, and the unread Christmas card still folded by my plate. Imogen leaned toward me. Her voice was very low. Hollis. Yes, Grandma. You did well. It didn't feel like winning.
No, she said.
It never does when it's family. Winning is for strangers. This was something else. She reached over and squeezed my hand, and her hand was cold, and her grip was not. This was telling the truth in a house that had agreed not to. That's harder than winning. And it's worth more. Through the kitchen door, I could hear the pitch of my mother's voice rising and falling. Not the words. Just the music of a woman discovering, in real time, that she'd lost a war she hadn't known she was fighting until the surrender. After a few minutes, my mother came back out carrying the pot roast.
She set it on the sideboard. She didn't look at me.
She straightened the serving spoons. She adjusted the trivet a 1/4 inch. She was performing competence the way some people perform grief, because it was the only thing left in the house that still worked the way she expected it to. Then she turned around, and her eyes were red. I'm sorry, she said. To the room, not to me. I didn't realize I'd made my daughter feel this way. I didn't answer. I hadn't planned for an apology, because I hadn't believed one would come. Then she looked at me directly. Hollis. I am sorry. Thank you, Mom. And I waited, because I've learned that an apology that arrives that fast is usually the first half of a longer sentence, and the second half is where the truth lives. She didn't disappoint me. But I want to say, she went on, I never meant a single one of those cards as anything but honest. I wrote what I knew.
You didn't tell me.
I can't be blamed for. Mom. I said it gently, which surprised both of us. You could have asked.
She stopped.
In 11 years, you never once asked me what I did. You asked me when I'd settled down. You asked if I'd met anyone. You asked for years running whether I was still at a gallery that had closed. You never asked what I was working on. And 2 years ago, Marjorie Pell handed you my name at a garden party and told you she'd seen me in a magazine, and you laughed and said I was dabbling. You had the truth in your hands. You set it down because the real me was harder to carry than the one you'd invented. Her face did something complicated. I'm not angry that you didn't know, I said. I'm telling you that you didn't know because you didn't want to know. Tabitha and Reed were stories you could tell at the club. I wasn't. So I became searching. For 11 years. In writing. To 93 people. Because searching was easier to put on a card than a daughter who'd already arrived somewhere you couldn't picture. She sat down slowly in her chair, the pot roast cooling untouched on the sideboard behind her. What do you want me to do, Hollis? She said. And for once it wasn't a manager's question. It was small and it was real, and it was maybe the first real question she'd ever asked me. Nothing, I said. Nothing. You can't undo 11 years of cards, and I don't want you to try. I didn't come here to get an apology out of you. I came to give you back the pen. I picked up the unread Christmas card, the one she'd handed me at the start of the night, and I set it down in front of her. You've been writing me for 11 years. I just wanted to write back.
Once.
In front of everyone. The way you did. She looked at the card. She looked at the 11 open cards on the table. She put her hand over her mouth. And then my mother, Coraline Vance, who ran the household and the garden society and 3 children like a portfolio, put her face in her hands at her own dinner table and cried in a way I had never seen her cry, in front of her sister-in-law and her garden friends and her brother-in-law and her son, and the daughter she'd erased, and the daughter she'd invented. Nobody moved. And then Imogen, very quietly, picked up the serving spoon, leaned over, and put a piece of pot roast on my plate herself. Because my mother had served everyone at the table during the reading and skipped me, out of habit, the oldest habit she had, and Imogen had seen it, and Imogen had decided that tonight, that particular habit ended. My mother watched her do it, and she let it happen. And I think that small surrender, letting Imogen feed the daughter she'd forgotten to, cost her more than any apology, and meant more. Dinner happened. Sort of. Conversation restarted the way it does at a funeral, once the worst of it has settled, in small, careful fragments. Wood asked my father about the firm. Aunt Junie asked Imogen about her garden. Doug, who'd said Jesus an hour earlier, asked me with real shyness what a provenance researcher actually does all day, and I told him, and he listened like it was the most interesting thing he'd heard in years, and maybe it was. Tabitha came back to the table eventually.
She didn't speak.
She sat down beside Sutton, who had moved his chair a few inches away and not moved it back. She ate almost nothing. Twice I caught her looking at me, not with hatred, which I could have handled, but with something worse. With the expression of a person seeing, for the first time, the size of the thing they'd done with 4 small words at a party and realizing it couldn't be unsaid. Around 8, my mother got up to bring out dessert and didn't come back. After 10 minutes, I went to find her. She was at the kitchen island, the dessert plate stacked beside her, the pie uncut on the counter. Mom. Hollis. Her voice was small. I sat on the stool next to her. Your father and I are going to need some time, she said, looking at the pie instead of at me. I'm going to need some time. I don't know how to be your mother right now. I told a whole story dash for years, and tonight she stopped. I don't know who I am if I'm not the woman who has it all handled. And here's the thing I want you to hear, because it's the part the cards never let either of us say. I didn't gloat. I'd spent 11 years imagining this moment, and in every version, I'd imagined it would feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like watching someone discover they'd been holding a map upside down for a decade, while you stood there having already walked the territory. Mom, I said, you don't have to figure that out tonight. I have to figure it out before January 8th. Or my friends will figure it out for me. A short, wet, almost laugh. I've spent 30 years controlling what those women think of this family. And in 3 weeks they're going to open the paper and find out I didn't know my own daughter. That part's not mine to solve, I said. But I'll tell you what I'd say, if it were me. She looked at me. I'd say the truth. I underestimated my daughter for years, and I'm not proud of it, and she's extraordinary, and I'm learning. That's a better story than the one you've been telling. It has a person in it instead of a trophy. My mother looked at me for a long, long moment. When did you get so much smarter than me? She said. I didn't, I said. I just stopped needing you to notice. We sat at that kitchen island for a long time. Neither of us cut the pie. Eventually Tabitha came in. She looked at the two of us. She picked up the pie knife and cut the pie and loaded the slices onto plates and carried them out to the dining room without a word, and I understood that this was the only apology Tabitha had in her that night. Service. Doing the thing. It wasn't enough, but it was real, and it was the beginning of something, and I let it be. My mother and I stayed in the kitchen. After a while she said, "Did you really keep all of them? 11 years? All of them?" In a binder labeled, cards dash. Yes. What was the binder for dash, Hollis? And she wasn't accusing. She was asking like she actually needed to know. It was for me, I said. So I'd remember what was true. When everyone around you agrees on a version of you that's wrong, you start to wonder if you're the one who's confused. The binder was how I kept my own evidence. So I'd know who I was, even when the cards said otherwise. My mother put her hand on top of mine, on the cold granite of the island. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. We just sat there, while the relatives finished the pie my sister had cut, and the dishwasher ran its final cycle, and the electric candles she'd been putting out since 1989 burned in the front windows. Then she stood up. She straightened her sweater. She wiped her face with a kitchen towel. And she went out to the front hall to say goodbye to her guests, to perform the one part of the evening she still knew how to perform, and I let her go because everyone is allowed to keep one thing they're good at. I drove Imogen back to Sewickley that night. She fell asleep about 20 minutes in, her grandmother's pearls rising and falling on her chest, and I drove through the dark with the radio off and let myself feel, for the first time all day, the thing I'd been holding back since 4 o'clock. It wasn't triumph. I keep telling you that because it's true, and because I think it's the most important thing in this whole story. It was the feeling of setting down a weight you've carried so long you'd stopped noticing it was a weight. You don't feel light exactly. You feel the place where the weight used to be. You feel your own shoulders for the first time in 11 years and discover they were never built crooked. The world just kept handing you things to carry on one side. I looked over at Imogen, asleep, 88 years old, who had driven 5.5 hours each way to sit on my mother's left and squeeze my hand at the right moments and tell the truth in a house that had agreed not to. Quiet things accrue, she told me when I was 7 in a museum, in front of a painting. She was right.
They had.
3 weeks later, the press release went out. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette ran the feature on January 12th, a photo of me from the auction house archives, a summary of my career, Cyrus Linwood's quote about the most discerning eyes of her generation. My mother called me on the 13th.
Hollis.
Maureen from the Garden Society called this morning. She wanted to congratulate me. What did you say? A pause. And then my mother said something I'll keep for the rest of my life. I told her the truth. I said I'd underestimated you for years, and I wasn't proud of it, and that you were the most remarkable of my children, and I was the last to know it. And Maureen was quiet for a second, and then she said, Coraline, that's the realest thing you've ever said to me. Another pause. She was right.
It was.
I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I've been telling a story for 30 years, my mother said. I think I'd like to try telling the true one for a while. It's harder.
But you're in it this time. The real you.
Not the one I made up because she was easier to carry. The repair has been slow. I won't pretend it's been a movie. There was no single moment where everything was healed. There were 100 small ones. My mother sends me a card every month now. Not the Christmas card. A regular one, the kind you buy at a stationery store. She writes one line. She tells me what she's been doing. She asks what I've been working on. Actually, asks and waits for the answer. She signs it Love, Mom. I write back. One line. I tell her what's on my easel that week, what I'm authenticating, where I'm flying. The new cards go in a different drawer. I don't keep them as evidence. I keep them because I want them. The binder is closed. It has 11 entries, and it will always have 11 entries. The era of needing evidence of my own life is over. Tabitha and I talk now. It took months. The first real conversation we had, she asked me, quietly on the phone, not able to look at me even over the phone, why I'd done it that way. In front of everyone. Why I hadn't just told her privately what I knew about the party. And I told her the truth. Because no one I'd vouch for wasn't private, Tabitha. You said it to a stranger at a party about your own sister to make yourself look better. The least private thing you ever did. So the correction couldn't be private either. She was quiet for a long time. And then she said, I've thought about that party every day since December. I had this whole life I was protecting. This whole position. And I sold you out for it without even slowing down. Like it was nothing. Like you were nothing. Her voice broke. Hollis, the thing I can't get past isn't that I did it. It's how easy it was. How little I had to think about it. I know, I said. I don't know how to make that right. You don't make it right, I told her. You just stop being the person who could do it that easily. That's the only thing that counts. It's the most honest conversation we've ever had. We're not close, the way some sisters are close. But we're honest now, which we never were before. And honest, it turns out, is the part I'd been missing my whole life. Not closeness.
Truth.
Reed visited in March. He spent a whole afternoon in my office, looking at the paintings on my walls, asking real questions about provenance, about how you prove what a thing is, about how you tell the true one from the copy. He stayed for dinner. As he was leaving, he hugged me at the door and said, "I spent my whole life being the smart one, and I never once noticed you were smarter. I'm sorry. I want to do better." He's 29. He's going to be all right. He just had to be shown that the pedestal he was standing on had other people underneath it. My father doesn't say much. He never has. But on the morning of the Linwood Gala in January, before I flew to New York, an envelope arrived at my row house.
Noverik handwriting.
No card from the stationery store. Just a single sheet of his firm's letterhead, folded in thirds, with 2 sentences in his small, careful lawyer's hand. I was wrong not to ask. I am proud of you. I keep that one on my desk. It's the only thing in a frame. And Imogen is still with us. 89 now, slower, but the eye is exactly as sharp as it ever was. I drove out to see her last month and we sat on her porch with tea, the way we have my whole life, and she said out of nowhere, the way she says the important things. "Do you know what I'm proudest of, Hollis? It's not the foundation. It's not the row house. Anyone with a good eye and enough years could have those." "What is it then?"
That you waited, she said.
"You had the truth the whole time. You could have screamed it at every dinner for 11 years and gotten nowhere, because nobody screams a family into believing them. But you didn't scream. You built. You kept your receipts. And you waited for the one moment when the truth would land so hard it couldn't be folded back up into a Christmas card." She set down her tea. "Quiet things accrue. You were always going to be the proof of that. I just got to watch. So here's what I learned. And then I'll let you go. The people who underestimate you usually aren't lying about you. That's the hard part. They believe it. They've decided who you are because the real you is bigger than the space they have to hold you in, and rather than build a bigger space, they shrink you down to a size they can carry. Searching. Dabbling. No one I'd vouch for. And you can spend your whole life arguing with them. Screaming the truth across the dinner table. Trying to make them see. It doesn't work. You cannot argue a person into revising a story that makes their own life easier to hold. So you do the other thing. You build quietly. You keep your receipts, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect, so that when the world tells you you're lost, you have a binder that says otherwise. And you wait. You wait for the day they hand you the pen, because they always, eventually, hand you the pen, usually thinking they're about to watch you sign your own humiliation. And on that day, you don't scream. You read.
Calmly.
In their own cadence. Until the paragraph that's been wrong for 11 years finally reads true, out loud, in front of everyone who ever believed the wrong one. That's my story. 11 cards. 1 binder. 1 grandmother who drove 11 hours round trip to watch me tell the truth. And 1 Saturday in December, when my mother handed me her pen, and for the first time in my life, I got to write myself. If someone somewhere decided who you were and wrote it down before they ever bothered to ask, this one was for you. You're not the label they gave you. You are the larger fact they couldn't fold into a card. Tell me in the comments, what was your family label? What did they decide you were before they asked? I read every single one. And if this story reminded you that your worth was never theirs to write, share it with someone who needs to hear that tonight. I'll see you in the next one.